Who is getting upset in the NCAA tournament? What is the real value of the basketball scholarship? What was it like playing in the NBA in the 90s? The only question left is, say it with me, you win? Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown Podcast. Today I am very excited to bring on the show Jim McElvain, who currently is the color radio voice for the Marquette men's basketball team and also played 7 seasons in the NBA. And I can't wait to just start breaking stuff down with you. So, Jim, thanks for coming on the show today.
I appreciate you having me on.
Is there any problem being a Marquette man that I am a Badger?
My brother went to Madison. My daughter might end up going to Madison. It's a good school. There's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, good to know. I just want to make sure I know where I stand to start off the whole thing. So, since you're knee deep in the college game and you've been calling the games for Marquette, I thought maybe we could touch upon what's happening. There's something going on this weekend, I think, right?
NIT tournament. Marquette's going to be playing in it tonight against Harvard.
Okay.
At the Al McGuire Center.
Okay. Well, how do you feel about that game against Harvard? Do you think that you guys are going to be able to win it at home?
I think they have a good chance. Harvard lost one of their key guys to injury, and then they had another guy go down in the Ivy League Conference Tournament Championship game. But they're still a very good team. Tommy Amaker could have left years ago and taken a more high-profile, better-paying job somewhere else. But I read an article several years ago about his situation in Harvard, and he's really happy there. His wife is happy there. She's got a great job. And it's, if you're going to coach at a school that's so focused on academics like Harvard is, why not have it be Harvard? Because it's the Harvard of Harvard. And you're going to get that certain tier of kids around the country who are really good basketball players who would love to take an opportunity to go play at a school like Harvard and get a Harvard education. And when you look at his roster, he had the 10th best recruiting class 2 years ago in the country, period. Not just of the smart schools, 10th overall. He's got some very talented players. They're guys are like McDonald All-American nominees and they're all-time leading scorers at their high school. So it's, he's got, Seth and Reed and Bryce, a bunch of waspy-sounding names, but these kids can actually ball, and he's got some very talented athletes. Well,
it is exciting as we move forward in the game of basketball, and I think with training methods that exist now versus when we were growing up, it's expected that some people who might not, what you wouldn't normally assume would be good athletes or good basketball players, are now able to unlock so much more of their ability, right? And so suddenly you now have like those kind of kids who, I just watched a highlight of a guy, oh my God, he's going to Georgetown next year from high school, Mac something or other, and this kid's 6'1" and like is hitting his head in the rim, and he's a white kid, so it's like I can't believe. But I know I've seen it because I've trained. I've had my kids that I've coached. The proper ways we have now with the technology we have, and yeah, it's pretty crazy. Do you kind of wish that maybe you had some of the more modern training stuff when you were growing up?
Well, I think I certainly would have benefited from it, but I was fortunate to be surrounded by great basketball people growing up who also had a level focus in life. And I think when people look at the issues the NCAA is having right now, the root of it starts at the high school levels, and especially with AAU. I spent most of the last summer embedded in AAU culture, and it's a mess, and it's to use Donald Trump's term, it's a cesspool, really. And there's people in there with no basketball background, with no basketball pedigree, who are determining the destination and the course of life of a lot of young men and probably girls to a lesser degree, that really don't belong in the game. And there's a lot of people who really have a great breadth and depth of knowledge of the game who have limited access or no access to these kids just because they're not walking around with their hand out looking for a sweatsuit for access to talk to a player, or they want a coach to give them $500 in cash so they can look at some outdated roster of who's playing in an AAU tournament. It's a total scam, and it's the NCAA's fault, because if they didn't allow coaches to go out and observe these AAU tournaments, the AAU tournaments and the whole culture would just vanish in a heartbeat. And I'm actually wearing a 5-star shirt today. I've worked 5-star camps a couple different times, and when I was in high school, that was the place to go. And when I talk about being surrounded by great basketball people, I had a great high school coach in Bob Letch. I had a great AAU coach in Rick Cobb, who was a former Marquette player and a former college coach. But I had great instruction at 5-star, and it was coaches like Billy Donovan and Jerry Wainwright, and I had, Joe Dooley was one of my counselors, and Christian Leitner was one of my counselors. And that's, that was, as I talk to coaches today, especially coaches who went through it, that was kind of like the golden era of AAU basketball, because there was still so much of a heavy emphasis on these skill camps where the kids went and they really worked with experts, not, some coach is going to roll out the balls and watch kids play 3 games in 2 days. These are guys that worked on half-court station drills, and there was no glory or drama. There was no dunking allowed at 5-star until the All-Star game. And that's missing now, because one coach got upset at another coach about access. That one coach got to a player at a camp, and the NCAA blew up the whole camp system and basically handed the keys to all this to shoe companies and the AAU structure that quickly devolved into the mess that it is now.
It's funny you bring that up at that time frame, because, so I was a basketball manager at Wisconsin. So I probably handed you a towel when you came. I can't remember. I know we played you at least once in my junior or senior year, right? You must have come to Madison at least one of those years, right?
We alternated at that time. We'd play I think we played at Marquette my freshman and sophomore years, and in Madison my freshman and junior year in Madison, my sophomore and senior years.
All right, yeah, because for some reason I'm getting UW-Milwaukee mixed up too with Bennett when he was there. So now I can't picture Marquette coming in.
But at Green Bay. Bennett was at Green Bay.
Wait, wasn't he in Milwaukee then? We'll have to go check.
No, Steve Antrim was in Milwaukee.
Then? Okay. Because I remember having to deal with, oh my God.
Tony was definitely in Green Bay playing, so I'm sure his dad was definitely up there coaching.
Oh, okay. I wonder what I'm thinking. Okay, maybe it was Green Bay then, not Milwaukee, but maybe UW-Milwaukee. Again, this is too long ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah. But the point is that, I learned a lot of the fundamentals, a lot of the training from, the coaches that when I was there was Stu Jackson, Sean Miller was an assistant, Sam Van Gundy was the other assistant there, Tim Buckley, who you might remember, who's been around.
I know Buckley. He was a Marquette guy for a while.
Oh, right. Everyone gets around everywhere. James Whitford was the head manager, who's now over at Xavier. Miami, Ohio, somewhere. He was with Sean Miller for all those years. But what I kind of look at is that sort of as ground zero for all the dogmatic skills training that coaches still cling to now. So because I almost feel like in the last 15 years, as we've gotten HD and frame by frame, we can really study what the players are doing. I feel like we've developed a lot of sort of new fundamentals that fly in the face of what we taught back then. And it kind of feels like, that 94, 95, that's when all that stuff solidified from the last 50 years. And they were still doing stuff then that we've been teaching right from the 60s and the 70s. What do you think about that? Do you feel like there are new ways of coaching and teaching that you've seen being around these teams?
I think there's certainly been great advancements in the way they manage athletes' bodies. The Marquette kids wear that little thing on the base of their neck that tracks all their biometrics when they play and when they practice, and they know how many steps these guys have taken. They track their heart rate and all that type of stuff. But to a certain extent, there's a lot of old school teaching that will never go away. The game changes and ebbs and flows, and the pro game is more of a 3-point game, and the traditional low post game has kind of gone away from the pro game. But the fundamentals are all still there, and the basics of how to play the game and team concepts. And when you look at the success that Tony Bennett's had at Virginia, it starts with defense. And that's something that every coach I ever had preached, and it holds true today. He only lost 2 games this season. He'll lose pretty quickly in the tournament probably because he's lost his 6th man. But it's, those fundamentals, they don't go away.
Okay, fair enough. So as you mentioned, the NCAA tournament this year. So you're thinking that Virginia might be an early out because of injury. Who do you have? There's some Big East teams in there that you're probably well familiar with. How far do you think that they're going to go?
I have my sheet right here, and I had Virginia losing to Arizona anyway before they had the kid with the broken wrist, just because I think they were going to get out talented by Arizona. And okay. I think if it wasn't going to be Arizona, it was going to be somebody else in their bracket, because It's a tough gauntlet to run, and I just, my guess is as good as anybody who just picks based on team colors and mascots. But I've watched the teams a little bit, and that's just my sense that it's hard to sustain that and get through a basketball season with 2 losses.
Fair enough. And then you don't think they're going to be able to handle Ayton on Arizona?
No, he's a handful, man, and he's good. And I don't have Big East teams going all that far. I have Nova losing to Wichita State in the Sweet 16, Seton Hall losing to New Mexico State in the Sweet 16. Can you believe I got New Mexico State to the Elite Eight?
Wow.
Xavier losing to Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. There's somebody else, right? Butler losing to Purdue in the second round, and where was the other one? It was Creighton losing to Virginia in the second round. I call that the third round now because of that stupid 4-game play-in thing they do.
Right. You don't like that?
No, it's terrible. Honestly, there's too many Division I teams. How many Division I schools are there?
400, 390? What is it?
351.
Okay, 351. Yes.
There should be 256. Everybody should go to the tournament. If they want to keep having these conference tournaments, they're welcome to do that. Shorten your regular season by a week. Otherwise, the Suncoast Conference or whatever that has 99% empty seats, you don't need to mess around with that and make teams travel and spend a bunch of money to have a conference tournament. So 256 teams are in. Everybody plays on the higher seeds home court the first weekend, and then you go off to your other regional areas in your 64 bracket after that.
Well, how are you going to do the seeding with that many teams? It's going to take them a month.
It wouldn't take that long. Look at all the different things they have right now. They've got quadrants, they've got RPI, they got BPI. It wouldn't be that difficult with 256. I mean, they already have lists of 1 to 351 for a billion different stats. They can they do it for 68 now. They were ready to do it for 92 until John Feinstein basically shut it down with that one question he asked about how are you going to make sure the kids aren't missing more school when you're adding that much, and so they shut it down. So they want to expand it. I think they need to go to 256. I think the bar to get into Division I was too low for a long time, and especially as they're talking about we need to pay these kids. There's already a Grand Canyon of a divide between the haves and the have-nots in college basketball, and to pretend that anybody, even outside of the top 100, can hang with anybody inside of the top 50 on a regular basis is just ludicrous. So, you might as well just lop it off at 256 and put everybody in and make a big deal out of it. And then Division II, and we call it the Homer 256. My co-host on the Marquette broadcast, Steve the Homer True, came up with the 256. His thought is, that was his idea, but Division II, if you win the Division II national championship, you come up to Division I and you get to stay there for 10 years. And then who gets kicked out of Division I? You can use any number of things that you want. What's your APR? What's your graduation rate? What's your attendance? What's your record? Are you just not competitive? And whatever you want to do to send one team down every year.
I didn't know you were a socialist. You're describing the European model, I think, right? Isn't that how they do it for soccer and stuff?
That's how they do it for soccer. I don't know if that's socialist, because if you look at the system we have now, there's a whole lot of schools going around in the preseason playing a bunch of what I call them paper pummel games, where they just go out and know they're going to get the tar beat out of them for most games for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 paychecks. It's a welfare system for college sports, essentially.
I wanted to take a quick break to talk to you about Simple Contacts, a convenient way to reorder your contact lenses that will save you money. When my wife runs out of her contacts, it's normally a nightmare to renew her prescription, and sometimes she's forced to wear her old ones for days until she finds the time to go out and pick them up. With Simple Contacts, they bring the doctor to you. You can take a vision test at home in under 5 minutes, then a real doctor reviews your test and writes you a new prescription. This isn't a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam, but it's the next best thing. Simple Contacts offers every brand of lenses, and their prices are unbeatable, and shipping is free. But my listeners also get $30 off their first Simple Contacts order with code CoachNick. To save $30 on your lenses, just go to simplecontacts.com/CoachNick or enter the code CoachNick at checkout. Again, that's simplecontacts.com/Coach Nick, or just enter Coach Nick at checkout.
Well, you know what? This is the most wide-ranging conversation I've had about college basketball, and we're going to touch upon a lot of things because, hey, I have some questions. What about the whole paying the players thing? I've had Luke Bonner come on and talk about it a couple times, and here's my take. Having been in the athletic department and seen behind the scenes a little bit, like I will want to insist, and I think you played for 4 years, right?
Yep.
So I kind of feel like we're kind of shifting, or whatever that word is, changing the value of an education to some degree. Although at this point now, it sounds like at least the top players aren't even really going to class at this point. And so that is one thing. They get, room and board. There should be value to that, and no one should be hungry like that guy said a few years ago. But I did the math at some point where if I think what the rule is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you pay the basketball players, the rule kicks in where you have to pay everybody in D1. Isn't that right, in every sport?
Yeah, I've heard Jay Billis talk about it before, and they're like, well, what do you pay the swimmers? And his joke is you give them the loose change out of the commons room couch. But there's Title IX rules that you have to consider, where we had somebody from the women's team complain when I was at Marquette because Mohinder basketballs gave everybody on our team like Letterman style jackets. And we also had letter jackets, but the women's team didn't get the Mohinder jackets. So we had to turn in either our letter jackets or the Mohinder jackets. So you turn in the Mohinder jacket or whatever, and then when you graduate, then you can have it back. Just, absurdity. So, I think I know Jay Billis has been one of the biggest critics saying you got to pay these kids, but even if you found a way to pay everybody and say, okay, your stipend's $5,000 a year per player or whatever, that's not going to stop anything. That's not going to stop shoe companies and boosters and agents from paying these guys even more. I mean, it's just stupid. And I think what gets lost in this, and I think it gets lost because I've never heard anybody talk about it. People stop at saying, well, there's value in the education and the room and the board, and there is, but there's even more tremendous value in what I consider really a double education for college athletes, whether it's basketball or football or even the non-revenue Olympic sports. When somebody comes out, if somebody's not an idiot and they take advantage of the opportunity that's presented to them, whatever school they come out of, they've graduated with a degree that can help them get a job. But they also have a resume at a very high level for the last 4 years of learning the game of basketball, learning the industry, for basketball or whatever other sport. They've made connections with different coaches and people. I mean, people look down on the sports industry like, well, that's not a real job. That's a real job. These coaches are out there making 6-7 figures. Mm-hmm. Assistant coaches are making 6 figures at a lot of these programs. And I know a lot of guys who used to play at the college level, and I don't know anybody who wanted to get into basketball as an industry who hasn't found a job that they can live off of. Now, I know guys who have tried to get in at the NBA level and they don't know the right people or they can't get a gig, but everybody who really wants a job, if they're willing to put in the work, they can go out and they can make a living at it, whether it's George Mirasan running skills camps and basketball camps, or it's Joe Wolf as an assistant at UNC Wilmington. And that's a really, these guys, if they work at it, it's a comfortable living in terms of how much money they can make. So when you compare that with a normal student who goes through 4 years of college, they just get the 1 degree and they don't have the connections. And Jay Billis is making millions of dollars on ESPN. Jay Williams making, Marquette's paid me over the years. I've done the radio there for 13 years. I've made hundreds of thousands of dollars doing radio. It's not money that you can make a living off of by itself, but it's it's free. It's like I do the games for free, and
right.
And they're basically paying me to travel and be away from my family. So, beyond coaching, beyond radio, beyond TV, there's administrative jobs. There's all kinds of things that guys can get into that most of them don't even have on their radar. I mean, look at how many former players are officials at the college level or the NBA. And David Stern forever wanted more former players to be officials. Guys just don't want to do it. That's a 6-figure job starting, 6-figure job, tons of travel, not much of a home life, but it's a 6-figure job, and you get every summer off just like you did when you were a player. and guys just don't even consider that. You know, they'd rather bumble around like Joe Smith does on his CNBC show, and charge one kid $45 an hour for individual work, or another one $82 an hour, and you know, NBA officials are going out there making six figures a year and living a pretty comfortable life.
Yeah, and we're talking about the Joe Smith, the right number one pick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, number one pick.
All right. Well, how about this? True or false? It is impossible to have a successful or a top 25 program without being dirty.
I think it's false, and I think a lot of the coaches in the college game are clean. It's hard because even if you're clean as a coach, who knows what a shoe company is doing behind the scenes in terms of trying to influence before a kid ever sets foot on your campus. Is he paying a kid to be on a certain AAU program, and they're going to funnel them into your school, and you're getting paid by the shoe company, so it's above board with you and the shoe company, but do you have some agent that's pulling strings behind before a kid even gets to college and is paying a kid before he even gets to college? And then boosters, you know, you try to, I think most coaches do a pretty good job at keeping them all at arm's length and not allowing players to put themselves in compromising situations. But I think there's a lot of programs out there that are clean. I think there's a lot of them that are excited about what the FBI is doing. They're looking forward to more people getting caught up in it because it's really an unfair playing field. And the surprising thing for me as a former player, I was recruited by a lot of coaches all over the country. I was recruited by coaches who have gotten in trouble or who have had reputations for being dirty coaches or cheating, or their programs were, you know, Jim Herrick at UCLA, Pat Kennedy at Florida State. You know what they offered me?
What?
They offered me jack squat. They offered me a scholarship and the opportunity to play at their schools. They didn't offer me anything inappropriate. So,
really?
You know, yeah, huh. And people say, well, other guys are getting paid, and I know guys who played at UCLA who, to this day, you know, they've got no reason to lie. They'll swear up and down, never got a thing. You know, they were scraping and struggling, and I totally believe them. Huh. And I think it's possible. It's not like, you know, if a program's dirty, everybody in the program's dirty, everybody's getting paid. I think it's possible that it's their job and their industry and their career. They know who wants to get paid and who doesn't, and it's like never the two shall meet. And right. So I've talked to guys who have gotten paid, and some of them don't even know where the money came from. But it's not easy to get into a conversation with those guys if you're one of the guys who never got paid. And so I probably haven't had nearly as many conversations as other folks have. And then I've talked to people like, yeah, who are we kidding? You know, we paid all our guys, and you know, the hypocrites are the schools that were paying them and you know, never got caught. And the NCAA knows what's going on, and they turn a blind eye to it. So
what are your thoughts on Sean Miller having, you know, the report is that he was caught on tape, and as far as I know, watching movies, you're supposed to call the money Big ZD, right? You're not supposed to call it money on the phone, but I guess they supposedly caught him, yet he is now going to stand up in the face of these charges and is trying to, I guess, fight them. What do you make of that whole situation?
Well, they always say innocent until proven guilty. There were a lot of people in college basketball who were ready to, you know, say he was guilty, and just based on a report, not based on, you know, TMZ playing audio of a conversation he was having. It was right. Just based on a report. So, you know, until that audio recording comes out and credible people have heard it and all that stuff, I don't put much stock in that. And I think coaches that cheat tend to be super paranoid people by nature and super cautious people by nature. And I would be surprised, especially knowing who they're dealing with, because they're not dealing with people who are, you know, well established and they've got, you know, careers and families and you know, they're dealing with runners and, you know, these bag men and people who are, you know, working for this guy now and working for somebody else 6 months later. They're you know, if they're cheating, I'm sure they're super cautious with people like that.
Well, let's take a little journey through your playing career and some of the coaches you played for, because it's kind of appropriate in some way. For a very brief moment, you had John Calipari as your coach.
I did, yeah.
What were your impressions of that? For I think it's about like maybe 20 games before he got fired that year?
Yeah, I liked him. We got along really well. The organization, I think, was kind of a mess, not in terms of management. John Nash was the GM. He drafted me when he was in Washington. I liked him a lot. But the ownership situation in New Jersey was just a cluster. I mean, they had a bunch of different owners and a couple, men that were at the front of the line and in front of the media when it came to talking about ownership. But I don't know if Jay-Z owned part of the team. Bill Cosby had like a small slice of the team, and that was an interesting conversation when he came in and talked to us. And then the Yankees got involved, and there was some kind of Yankees-Nets merger with George Steinbrenner, and
wow.
And so, Cal was in a tough spot. They had made the playoffs the year before, and the team just started out rough, and guys got hurt, and it was a lockout year, and everybody's rhythm was off in terms of you're playing 4 games in 5 nights, to try to squeeze in as many as you can in the season. And I talked to him after he got fired, and I said, why are you messing around? You've climbed the mountain, you've been in the NBA, you know all the people, you got young kids. Why don't you go back to college and get some job somewhere? You'll be able to get into any house in the country because you have that NBA pedigree. And you'll have a safe, secure place for your family to grow up and your kids to go to the same school and have a normal life instead of bouncing around the NBA. And he went to Memphis and did really well there, and went to Kentucky, and he's been there ever since. And not like Jim McIlvaine laid the course out for him, but it seemed to make sense to me, and it seemed to work pretty well for him up to this point.
Yeah, it certainly has. And he, let's just say this, he'll never be a guy getting caught on tape talking about giving money to recruits.
Never say never,
Okay.
But I'd be surprised. He's done so well.
Well, you'd be surprised to get caught, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, who would have thought some guy trying to fund some B movie would have been the domino that started tumbling everything over. That's where this all started, and look where it's ended up now. So, all these big, things that blow up in our society sometimes start in the most innocuous ways, and it's shocking who gets caught up in the mix as everything goes down.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I remember being at a big clinic put on by George Raveling, and one of my buddies who was a coach at St. Anthony's in New Jersey, under Bob Hurley. He's like, "Hey, Nick, you want me to tell you which coaches here leave the bags of money at our players' houses?" And I was like, I don't even want to know. I mean, you can look and you'll know if you go on my channel who was there. But it was a lot of big names, and it is frustrating because I know Jay Billis, for instance, wants to argue you should negotiate with high school seniors, and you can pay them whatever you want to get them to go. And
it's easy to do that when you're a Duke alum, right? And you know that your alma mater has deep pockets and has been at the top of the game, and will continue. They have one of the biggest budgets in college basketball, so why wouldn't they be able to go out and afford to do that?
And don't you think that they've sort of dodged a bullet? Maybe so has Carolina. There's a little things that pop up here and there that don't sound right, and you can't imagine it was an isolated incident, right? And yet, there's some. Is it sweeping under the rug? I don't know. Listen, you don't have to burn it down if you don't want to, but I just wonder about some of those programs because oh my goodness, who was the guy from Duke who was buying all the jewelry in New York, and he's playing in the NBA right now? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Anyway, little things like that where you're like, okay, he as a college kid would not have had $100,000 to buy jewelry on whatever, but
I think when this stuff all started coming out, I would have been concerned if I were at any school that was in the running for any of these kids that were mentioned as receiving money and payments and all that stuff. If my school was on that list and I got that kid, and somebody else didn't, and so if you're recruiting against these other schools and these schools are getting these guys and you got an All-American that Auburn didn't, or you got an All-American that USC didn't, it's like, well, how come you got that guy and the other school didn't? If the other school's getting caught for paying kids, how did you get the kid if you didn't pay for him, if they've allegedly been caught paying other kids? So that would make me nervous, and I don't think Marquette's been in that situation. I think there's a pretty good comfort level that Marquette's in the clear, but there's a lot of other schools out there that are like, okay, we've got all Americans and we beat these schools out that are getting in trouble now. How do we get these guys?
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, in case people don't know, the connection at Marquette is Steve Wojciechowski, who was a longtime assistant at Duke. You remember a player named Rashard Griffith?
I do.
So that was one of those instances where he was also set to go to, I believe it was Illinois, and then all of a sudden Stu got there, and poof, there he was on campus, last second, whatever it was, and he was actually great. I've never quite understood why a kid who could be a 20-10 player as a freshman in the Big Ten never got a shot in the NBA.
Somebody showed me a clipping from a Chicago paper when he signed with Wisconsin. It was a quote from his mom that they got a better offer. And they're like, what does that mean? I said, right. That's a good question. What does that mean? It should be a scholarship, just like the other school's a scholarship.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, well, and you remember even further back, the Illinois situation with Iowa, right, where, who was the center who they got
Bruce
him on
Pearl
tape?
and Deion Thomas.
Deion Thomas.
And I'll tell you, I was inundated with mail from Iowa when Bruce Pearl was there, because Deion Thomas is like a year ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I was so nervous when that went down, because the way college basketball worked at that time, I had a rotary phone at home that didn't have call waiting because my parents were too cheap to get call waiting. And I had a great coach in Rick Cobb, who used to be an assistant for Rick Majerus, so he knew the game.
Wow.
And we always asked him when he was coaching us in AAU, why aren't you coaching in college? And he's like, because I'm making more money right now working for a mutual fund company. And okay. And he actually got back into AAU because he's good friends with Tim Allen, whose son Jason Allen was my age. And it was, am I saying that? Is it Tim Allen? Because I know another Tim Allen.
Well, there's a Tim Allen who's on TV all those years.
No, it's not that Tim Allen. It's a guy who played at Miami.
Oh.
And he played in the ABA for a while, and his son was a 4-year starter at San Jose State. It's not Tim Allen. It's Jason Allen. Will Allen. God, why am I thinking Tim Allen? Will Allen was good friends with Rick Cobb, and he talked him into coaching the AAU team with them. Now I lost my train of thought because I was struggling so much to grab onto Will Allen.
We were talking about Deion Thomas and how you were afraid.
Oh, yeah. So Rick said, you know what? If these coaches are bothering you, just say you can call me from 7 to 9 o'clock every night, or 5 nights a week or whatever. And my wife played at Carolina, and her and her sister were both recruited by everybody in the country because they were both really tall. And it was so bad for them that they don't even like talking on the phone anymore to this day, because they just got so sick of talking on the phone to people when they were in high school. And so I had this 7 to 9 o'clock window, and coaches knew that. They knew I had no call waiting, so it's not like somebody else could call in. So their job was to call me at exactly 7 o'clock and keep me on the phone until 9 o'clock so nobody else could talk to me.
Wow.
And I talked to so many different coaches, and you're a high school kid, and you don't want to be mean to anybody, but if somebody from Bumble Stump State is calling you, and you just want to say, look, I just don't have an interest in going to your school. I'm sorry. And some of these coaches were very persistent. So, when that stuff came out with Deion Thomas, I was thinking to myself, wow, was Bruce Pearl one of those coaches that I was trying to get rid of, and I just got fed up with him? And if he said, why wouldn't you consider Iowa? And did I say, and if he suggested it, why aren't you considering Iowa? Is somebody else paying you? Would I have said, yeah, I'm getting paid, and then just hung up? And maybe I did. I don't know. But if I did, it never came out, and I never did get paid. But I never had to worry about going to Iowa. But from what everybody says, the thing that upset the industry so much was that it was Bruce that turned the guy in, of all people.
So that's the backstory for the people who are, I'm sure, way too young to remember that. They were recording the tapes of Bruce Pearl promising a lot of money to recruit Deion Thomas. Or no, Deion Thomas said he got a car from Illinois, right? And
they got a Blazer and money from
a Chevy
Illinois
Blazer. Remember those?
Yeah, those were the hot vehicle back then.
Oh, yeah. And so, but out of that, by the way, what I understood when I was at Wisconsin was that because when that happened, every team would have a folder on everybody else's violations. And the second a team would turn somebody in, they would just drop their folder off to the NCAA as well. So it almost was like this gentleman's agreement after that, where, if they had dirt on you, they're going to save it until, in case you were going to try and turn them in, which is interesting. I believe that. It was kind of a rumor, around town, but it sounds reasonable at that point that, that's probably what teams would do to stop other people from whistleblowing.
And, you don't realize when you're a 17-year-old kid how dirty the game is. Even back then, it was pretty dirty. And I had
but not
one
for you,
school,
though. Is that what you're saying? It wasn't dirty for you.
It wasn't. On the surface, nobody was offering me anything. But 20, 30 years later, these stories come out, and I find out that one of the schools that was recruiting me that I didn't want to go to, when I said I'm not considering you anymore, they thought, at the time I was looking at, certain schools are like, well, Marquette's an NCAA time bomb waiting to go off, which obviously never happened. And I'm like, why would they single out Marquette, when I'm looking at all these other schools? And come to find out, years and years later, the assistant coach who was recruiting me was sleeping with a girl in the ticket office. And the girl in the ticket office was sneaking into the men's basketball office and stealing recruiting information and feeding him all kinds of recruiting information. There were no violations, but, would you do that? This guy was married, and he had kids, and he was sleeping with a girl in the ticket office to try to get information on a recruit. Just total scumbaggery, Just awful.
So let's talk about you as a player for a second, because I think people want to put in their minds that they haven't seen the footage. You come in the league, you got a nice crude cut. You're 7 feet. Are you 7 feet even? Is that what we're talking about?
7'1".
Okay, 7'1". Now, let me ask you this. Could you shoot threes back then?
I made a 3 in the NBA.
Hey, you did.
I never
10.
shot a 3. I never shot a 3 in college. I went out and I worked out for Portland, and I had my best workout for the Trailblazers. If Aaron McKee wasn't available, they said they were going to draft me, and they got Aaron McKee. But they had me shoot threes, and I'd never really shot threes before, and for whatever reason, I was draining them, just killing it.
Huh.
And so they were really excited about it. It was never really a part of my game. I was always a back to the basket guy, and then after that, I never really shot threes again until I got to Seattle, and George Karl said, "You're going to shoot threes." And every day in practice, every shoot around, I was with Sam Perkins, and we'd shoot threes, and I shot them proficiently enough that they felt comfortable with me shooting them in games. And I think probably first several times I did it, I wasn't comfortable shooting them in a game, even though I knew I had the ability to knock it down. And I hit one eventually, but that was it. And the other ones, it's not like I shot air balls or bricks or anything. It just didn't fall, and the line wasn't as far back as it is now, and it was way too close. But yeah.
Well, here's what's interesting about that, because as the three-pointer has become so prevalent now, I remember, we had Bulls tickets all those years from the Jordan era, and I remember, this is right before you got to Seattle, but game one of the finals in Seattle versus I'm sorry, it was game one of the Bulls. Bulls Lakers in '91, but Sam Perkins was on that team. And Sam Perkins, who was 6'10", lefty, the kind of guy that would be back to the basket. Back then, it was hard to watch Western Conference teams, right? They didn't really have league pass. We didn't really know as much. I was a Lakers fan, but I didn't quite see a lot of games. He started shooting threes, and you could almost hear a gasp in the crowd in Chicago Stadium when he started, and he was hitting them, right? They won game 1-on-1, and it was like, what is going on here? So this notion that the big guys shooting threes now is new. I don't really know if it's that new, right? Certainly in your era you saw it.
No, Jack Sikma, when I was in grade school and junior high in Milwaukee, was shooting threes for the Bucks. That was Don Nelson.
Yeah.
And Don Nelson was putting that on Jack, and Jack had a good stroke and could knock the shot down from outside. It's just, did you ever go through a system or a coach where they wanted bigs to step out on the floor and stretch the floor and shoot the three? And I never did until I made it to Seattle and played for George Karl.
So talk about what kind of player, if you wanted to compare yourself to somebody maybe now so the youngins could get a handle on what kind of player you were. Can you compare yourself to anybody in the recent years?
I would just say go to Basketball Reference and look up who they compare you against.
Oh, we can do that.
Yeah, that's probably a good comparison if there's modern players in there or not. That's statistically at least that gives you an idea of what kind of player I was.
Well, Cole Aldridge, Bill Wennington, Myers Leonard, although he shoots threes. Oh, Paul McKeskey. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
And Paul shot threes too, but I was a shot blocker, and I wasn't as much of a scorer. I scored at a pretty good clip in college, but I was always the fifth option in offense on every NBA team I was on, and not without good reason, because their NBA is full of fantastic scorers. So most of my points came off of offensive rebounds or drop-offs on layups, and not the first priority, like, let's go down and run a set for Jim. That never happened in the NBA.
Really? And a set for you would have been get him that right block and lob it into him and let him go.
Yeah, run America's play, a box screen, screen down, turn and post, and I could count literally on one hand the number of times any team ever said, let's run a play and get Mac the ball and see what happens. It just didn't happen.
Wow. Well, listen, it happens, right? You have to be a team player, and however that shakes out. So you got to Seattle right after they played the Bulls and that great Bulls team in the finals.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, and you played 79 games for them, and you started 79 games. You actually played all 82, but you started 79. And what was that? Were they hoping that you were going to come in and sort of get them to the next level and then win that finals?
Yeah, I think I was a piece to the puzzle. They saw their team was getting older, and I was a younger player. And to be quite honest with you, my second year in the league, if you look at the last 10 or 12 games, I don't know how many. When I was drafted by the Bullets, my agent was excited, even though they had Kevin Duckworth and George Mirasan on the roster, because he didn't see either one of those guys having much of a career in terms of their ability for their bodies to hold together. So he's like, you're going to get time, even though you're the third center. If you make this team, that you'll get an opportunity. Yeah, and I had some. Jimmy Lynam gave me some minutes. But it wasn't until the very end of my second year, when everybody was hurt and Kevin Duckworth was gone, but George Mirasan finally ended up with an injury that prevented him from playing, that I went out and I played 35 minutes a night or so and averaged almost a double-double, almost had a triple-double against the Bulls in one of those seasons when they won a bazillion games in a championship, and played pretty well against Seattle too. And so based on that short time span and that small sampling of games, teams saw that if I played 35 minutes a night, I could put up some pretty solid numbers, and so I had a lot of interest as a free agent after my second year.
Aha. So you came in, and that was Gary Payton, Detlef Schrempf, another guy who was probably ahead of his time as a small ball four, and Sean Kemp. Let me ask you this, and these are your teammates, so you don't have to speak ill of anybody, but here I got roasted on Twitter when Gary Payton made the Hall of Fame a few years ago. For me, and again, the caveat is that back then it was hard to watch a lot of Western Conference games, right? So I saw all the finals games and really got to see that. I probably saw some of the playoff games in the years before with Gary Payton. But like my take on who should be in the Hall of Fame is, if I watch a guy live and I walk out of that stadium and say to myself, man, I just saw a Hall of Famer. And when you would watch that Seattle team, that's not the guy who you would walk away saying, man, that's a Hall of Famer. Sean Kemp was the guy you would have said, wow, like that was my impression of that. What did you think about that?
I thought Gary Payton was a Hall of Fame caliber point guard, probably one of the very best I ever played with. And you just look at his numbers that he put up every night, just staggering. And I thought Detlef Schrempf was probably one of those very elite guys. I thought Sean Kemp was. I thought Vin Baker was. I mean, they really had a loaded team. They had other guys like Hersey Hawkins and Dale Ellis and Sam Perkins who were really good at specific things. But guys like Detlef and Gary and Sean and Vin could just take over games by themselves. They could create their own offense. That when they wanted to, they could be very good defensively, and some wanted more than others. Gary and Detlef, really came to the forefront defensively. Det was always the guy we put on whoever was hard to guard on the other team, and Gary was obviously, all NBA defensive player for years and years, but the other guys were certainly very talented enough to do that, and so I've played with a lot of other guys that were really good, and there's a handful, like Chris Webber was really good like that, and I thought Juwan Howard eventually turned into a player that was really good like that, and I'm sure there's more that I'm just not thinking of right now. Stephon Marbury I thought was like that, but I don't know if it's political or if you don't get a certain number of NBA championships or all-star appearances. I mean, all those things are indicators. And if a guy has a great career and never makes the finals or never makes, an NBA championship, is he going to be snubbed from the Hall of Fame? I don't know. It probably happens sometimes and doesn't happen in other instances, depending on maybe how much people like or dislike a guy.
Right. Now that year, so you had played the Bulls for 6 games the year before. Sorry, the Seattle did the team before you got there. What happens in that next year when you get there in the playoffs that doesn't see a rematch and then Utah ends up getting in?
I'm trying to remember.
The Rockets beat you in the semifinals.
Yeah, the Rockets beat us in the semifinal. Did we play Minnesota in the first round?
Phoenix.
Okay, we beat Phoenix the first year, and then I think the second year I was there, we beat Minnesota in the first round. Houston was a really good team, and they had Hakeem Olajuwon, and they had Clyde Drexler, and those guys were really tough. And it wasn't a guarantee. We had a great team during the regular season, but when it came down the stretch, Nate McMillan was not the player when I got there that he was the year before. Each year, Nate's body continued to decline to the point where when I got there, they were hardly playing him at all. They were just saving his body, hoping to get minutes out of him in the postseason because his knees were shot and his body was just breaking down. So it wasn't like they just took out one piece and put one other piece in and it all fell apart. There was a variety of factors going on. George Karl, unbeknownst to me, didn't get along really well with Wally Walker at all. And I think that carried over into some of the personnel stuff that was going on. It carried over into playing time for various guys, I think, and it was just frustrating. And I understand both of their positions, and I think there's validity to both of it. It's just unfortunate that the team was so close to being an NBA championship team and couldn't find a way, from top to bottom to put together. And I certainly put some of that blame on myself because, I wanted to play better every year in the league than I did, and I certainly played better in Seattle than I did in Washington, but I didn't elevate my game to the level that certainly people out there were expecting, and I ended up getting traded to New Jersey as a result.
Okay, well, that happens, and certainly just the experience, I have to imagine it was really valuable to you as well. I'm kind of looking at that team and the assistant coaches on that team. I'm kind of curious your thoughts because you're talking Dwayne Casey, Terry Stotts, Tim Gergerich, who is just the defensive mastermind behind how we play defense these days, and even Bob Weiss, who goes way back in the day. Did you know that Dwayne Casey and Terry Stotts were going to be head coaches that will be very successful?
Well, Bob Weiss had already been a head coach, and Tim Gergerich was just different and special, and I knew it right away then, and everybody else did. I've heard stories about his workouts in Vegas and how they're going now, and they're very structured and organized, and a lot of stuff's going. We just flew out to Vegas to go work out with Gerg in the summer because Gerg was the coach you wanted to work out with. He wasn't judgmental. He just wanted to help you. He just, his motives were true and pure, and it wasn't, you're making me look bad as a coach. He just, he wants you to help. He wants to help your game. So guys automatically gravitate towards Gerg. Not that there was anything wrong with the staff George had. That was by far my favorite coaching staff, top to bottom. Just so much talent, so much knowledge. And I'm not surprised at all that Terry and Dwayne ended up as head coaches in the league. And they were just, it was a brilliant team to come from Washington. And I thought Jimmy Lyon was a really good coach. I thought Derek Smith was a good coach. But the resources they had in Seattle, we had actual scouting reports like we had back in college when I got to Seattle. And they paid some guy who did advanced analytics. And when you read a scouting report, it would say Dikembe Mutombo turns over his left shoulder 85% of the time, and he makes 72% of those shots, and he turns over his right shoulder 15% of the time, and he makes 35% of those shots. Well, make Dikembe turn over his right shoulder. We had nothing like that in Washington, and we had nothing like that in New Jersey. So Seattle was really way ahead of their time, and Terry Stotts and Dwayne Casey and Bob Weiss and those guys put those scouting reports together. They had every play that the other team ran listed out. They had a paragraph on every guy. They had all the tendencies, and it was just phenomenal intelligence that I'm sure is standard now in the league. But it was just, there was nothing to look at and no way to prepare outside of that with some of these other coaching staffs that we had. And truthfully, I think some were capable of doing it, but they knew who their players were, and they just leave the scouting report laying on the floor and wouldn't read it anyway. And Seattle put our names on the upper right corner of each scouting report. I still have all of them. I kept all of them. And I always tore my name off the corner in case I did leave it somewhere, so
they wouldn't know.
They could say, Mac, you get fined if you leave your scouting report sitting around somewhere.
Yeah.
So I made sure I never did that, but I took them with me because they were a great resource in New Jersey when we're playing a team. It's like, well, I'm going to grab my scouting report from last year and go through their personnel again and remember if this guy likes to drive to the middle or if he likes to drive with his right hand or pull up for mid-range jump shots or, all the tendencies that now all that advanced analytics stuff, I'm sure it's just everybody does it.
I mean, you're giving me flashbacks now to putting in a VHS tape, which, if you needed to rewind for like 3 seconds, it would take you 30 seconds just to get it back and then start playing again. I remember being in the basketball office. We would literally cut out clippings of basketball game recaps from high school from like the 15 or 20 papers across the country that we were subscribed to, and I had to paste them up into a book. And then, it's almost like the presidential daily brief, right? I would have to do that for our coaching staff. And it's crazy now with synergy and the different ways you have to scout and see everything. It's funny. I don't know if the kids today will even, respect what we had to go through, but certainly to be able to get that information back then and do it. And you're blowing me away. I don't think I realized that, the Supersonics staff had that information even back then. Or even like Dean Smith was doing points per possession in the 60s, I believe. So that's just crazy how forward thinking some guys are.
There was a group of brothers or the Cohens or somebody like that was doing this information, and Pat Riley, from what I heard, he liked it so much he hired him on staff in Miami and then cut off everybody else in the league who was subscribing to him because he saw it as a competitive advantage. And so other people came along and filled the void, and it's more common now, but that was invaluable to have. And just looking back at some, the box is sitting somewhere, looking back at those, and like when I went to New Jersey and guys are like, let me see what they said about me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's
listen,
striking.
Jim, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and really just having a rambling, insightful conversation about college, pros, recruiting, whatnot. I really appreciate it, certainly going back on memory lane. And I wish you also the biggest luck tonight against Harvard in the NIT.
Thank you very much. And I want to give a shout out to my sponsors. First and foremost, Optima Batteries, because they allow me to take time off of work because I work for Optima Batteries to do podcasts in the middle of the day. Lingenfelter Performance Engineering, BF Goodrich Tires, Forge Line Wheels, Willwood Disc Brakes. It seems weird that it's car stuff, but I work in the automotive aftermarket. So all those folks sponsor me. And I also have started a podcast recently of my own with a Marquette alum, John Scott Lewinsky. It's called Marked Men, MARQDMEN.com. And we talk about basketball, but we talk about car stuff. And John's really a fascinating guy who's been all over the world. In fact, we reconnected because I'm a BF Goodrich brand ambassador, and they had me on an event where they were unveiling a new truck tire in Baja, Mexico. And we were pre-running the Baja 1000, and John was down there doing some stories on that tire for some magazine or something like that. And it's like, John Lewinsky in Marquette. I'm like, holy cow. And so we hit it off there and have stayed connected ever since. And probably, I did Adam Ryan's podcast, the In All Airness podcast, several years ago. And ever since then, I've kind of been intrigued by him because he just hit me up on Twitter. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. And anybody who hits me up on Twitter for a podcast, I'm like, yeah, what do I care? I'll do it. I just became intrigued by him. I started listening to more of them and got to the point where I said, John, I'm getting done doing the radio for Marquette after this season. I'd love to do a podcast, but I don't think I'm Jim enough to carry it by myself. And you're like the most fascinating guy I've ever met. You want to do a podcast with me? He's like, sure. So he does all the heavy digital lifting, and we're putting it together. We have 2 episodes out, and we'll have more out.
Awesome.
On a regular basis coming soon.
Well, I'll definitely subscribe and keep your eyes out, sports fans, for Marked Men. An interesting discussion on, like Jim just said, basketball, and probably you described it as the most interesting man in the world, right? Kind of like the Dos Equis guy.
Yeah, he doesn't look anything like the Dos Equis guy, but he knows everything there is to know about booze and food boxing and cars and travel and just, you get music. You could talk to the guy forever. I took him to Rival Sons concert. He knew exactly who Rival Sons was, and everybody says, "Oh, I like all kinds of music," and then I start playing all kinds of my music that I like to listen to. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I really don't like all kinds of music like you do. And John, it clicks with him. It registers. He knows who all these people are. He appreciates the musicianship, and so we, movies, and he worked in Hollywood as a writer for a long time and knows all kinds of interesting stories about that stuff. So it's cool having conversations with him. You never know what's going to pop up.
For sure. Well, I will definitely check it out. Hopefully everybody out there checks it out as well. And Jim, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Jim?
I'm in. Have me back sometime. I'll talk your ear off again.